Are you ready to get started learning Unreal Engine? Let's jump right in. All right, so before we can dive in and start learning how to use Unreal Engine, we'll need to actually get Unreal Engine installed on our computers. But before we can do that, you'll need to have an account with Epic Games, the creators of Unreal Engine. Now, if you already have Unreal installed, you can go ahead and skip to the next video. Otherwise, I'm going to walk you through the 3-step process to get up and running. Step 1, you'll need to have an Epic Games account. Now, if you play Fortnite, Rocket League, or use the Epic Games Store, then you already have an Epic Games account. And you can use this same account for Unreal Engine. If not, you'll need to create one. To get started, go to unrealengine.com in your browser. Now, we're going to go up here and click on this Sign In button, where you'll be presented with an overwhelming list of options. You're going to want to click on the Sign In with Epic Games. Now, if you already have an account, you'll enter your login credentials here. If you don't, you're going to click on the Sign Up button at the bottom. When signing up, yes, you will need to input your birthday. This is a legal requirement because the same account is used for their game store, and of course for online safety in games like Fortnite. Once you've entered your birthday, fill out the rest of the information and click Continue to create your account. Step 2, we need to download and install the launcher. Once you're signed in, you can go up here and click on the Download button. On this page, you'll see the recommended system requirements on the left, but really these are the minimum requirements for working with Unreal Engine 5. You'll want to make sure you are running at least these specs that match your operating system. On the right, you'll see the licensing information. The key thing to take away from this section is that Unreal Engine is free to use. When they say free, they really do mean free. I've personally used Unreal Engine on television productions, feature films, and even VR training experiences for multi-billion-dollar corporations. Epic never charged us a penny for any of it. Now, go ahead and scroll down just a little where you will see the Download Launcher button. You'll want to download and install this. Below that, you'll see a provided video on installing the engine if you need a slower step-by-step tutorial. Once you have the launcher installed, open it up and sign in with your Epic Games account. Step 3, we need to install the engine. With the launcher open, it will likely take you to the Epic Games Store section at the start. On the left, we want to go down here to the Unreal Engine option. Clicking on this will give you a slightly different interface. To get this up and running, we'll want to go to the Library tab up at the top. Now, mine looks a little different than what a fresh one will because I already have Unreal Engine installed. On mine, under Engine Versions, you can see several cards with different numbers. These represent all the different versions of Unreal that I have installed. And yes, you can have multiple versions of the engine installed at the same time. Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5 are both managed here and are easily identified by the number at the beginning. Now, to get this installed, we're going to click on the plus symbol next to Engine Versions. That's going to add a card with a drop-down that allows you to select which version you want to install. For this course, go ahead and select the highest engine version number available. At the time of this recording, that was 5.1.0. Then, click Install. Unreal Engine is a large program, so this is going to take a while to download and install. Be patient and you'll get this going. All right, so let's recap. In this video, we learned about setting up our Epic Games account, installing and using the Epic Games launcher, and how to install Unreal from within that launcher. Now, depending upon what project you're working on, you might actually need to be using a specific version of Unreal Engine. For example, a game studio I am currently working with is using Unreal Engine 5.0 with custom code and the plan to upgrade to 5.1 in the future. Conversely, A television team I was recently working with is still using version 4.27 because it plays nicer with the LED volume wall technology that's being used in virtual production on things like The Mandalorian or The Batman. As another example, I'm using 5.1 to teach this course and for all of my personal projects as well. Now, of course, I have all of these different versions installed on my computer at the same time. So remember, if you need more than one version, you can have it. All right, so we've got Unreal Engine installed. It's time to unpack what an Unreal project actually looks like. Now, you may have already figured out how to create a project on your own, but I encourage you to still take the time to watch this video because we're going to dive into some things that you may not have known about. In this video, we're going to go over the 3 key elements of an Unreal Engine project. So go ahead, open up your Epic Games Launcher, and let's dive right in. Our first step to creating a project is to launch Unreal. With the launcher open, make sure you're in the Unreal Engine category. We're going to go to our Library tab and click the Launch button for the version of Unreal that we want to launch. You can also click the Launch button up here if you have it set to the version you normally use. For this course, let's open up the newest version we have installed, which at the time of this recording is Unreal Engine version 5.1. Now, launching Unreal for the first time can take a while, and there are a couple of spots where it might look like it's hanging or frozen. So if it looks like it's stuck on 45% for a few minutes, don't worry. It's going to do a lot of work in the background to get the workspace ready for you. So go ahead and pause this video, go make yourself a snack, and come back when the project window is opened. All right, key element number 2, actually creating the project. The project window can be very overwhelming with all of the options available to you. Unreal Engine is a powerful beast with uses across several different industries. Once you know what you're doing and you're creating a project specifically for one of these industries, you'll know which option to select. For just starting out, I recommend going to the Games tab, where we're going to select the third-person template. Now, the reason why I recommend the third-person template for just starting out is twofold. Reason number 1, it provides a human-sized character that you can easily drop in and use for scale reference in anything that you are doing. Reason number 2, you can drop in and play as this character to run around your scene in real time. All right, so we have our third-person template selected. Now, looking at the options over here on the right, we can choose between Blueprint or C++. This is referring to the main style of code we want to start with. Keep in mind that this selection is largely arbitrary because regardless of what you select here, any project can and likely will use both C++ code and Blueprint. It's typically easier and faster to start with Blueprint, even if you plan on using C++ later in the project. Now, we'll go over what exactly Blueprint is in a later video. For now, we're just going to select that option. We'll leave the target platform as desktop and quality preset at maximum. For this learning project, we'll go ahead and include the starter content, which I'll touch on a little bit later. For ray tracing, we're going to go ahead and leave that turned off for now. The ray tracing option can improve visuals if you have a video card that supports it. If your video card has RTX or RX in the name, then you can go ahead and use it. Otherwise, ray tracing won't work on your system. This is true for any client users you deploy a package project to as well. Now, it does take time for the computer to prepare a project for ray tracing, so for now, even if your card does support it, we're gonna leave it off for this project. We wanna get into our project and working as fast as possible. Next, we need to determine where we want to save our project. The default option in My Documents might not always be the best. I like to create a folder on my hard drive specifically for my Unreal Engine projects, as close to the root as possible. This is really helpful for reducing the length of file path names. Next, we're going to pick a name for our project. For this one, we can just call it My First Unreal Project. Now, you'll notice I typed this all as one word. This is because you can't use spaces in your name. Alternatively, you can use something like underscores in place of spaces, or you can use camel casing. Camel casing is when you capitalize the first letter of each word in the phrase. How you name this will largely come down to your personal preferences. All right, once that's all set, go ahead and click Create. Now, we let the engine build our project and we wait. Now that the project is open, the first thing we're going to do here is click the little X to close it. Counterintuitive? Maybe. But we're doing this so we can learn how to open our projects each time we want to work on them. This brings us to the third key element, the project folder. Now you'll see here in our library, there is a My Project section. This lists all of the projects you've opened with Unreal on this specific computer. You can open a project from here by double-clicking the icon, but this list can grow to an overwhelming size pretty fast as you work on more projects. So let's look at another way to open our projects up. Remember how we set a project folder location when we created the project? Now we want to actually navigate to that folder on our computer using Windows Explorer or Finder if you're on a Mac. Here I am in my project folder location. In it, you can see a folder with our project's name. If we go into that folder, we'll see several other folders and a project file. Now, double-clicking this file will open our project. This will be our main and preferred way of opening projects. So it can be helpful to create a shortcut to it. If you're on Windows, you can right-click it, go down to Send To, and then Desktop Create Shortcut. Now, we have a shortcut on our desktop that we can double-click to open the project moving forward. If you're on a Mac, you'll do the same thing by right-clicking on it and select Make Alias to create a shortcut on your desktop. Now, looking back at our folder structure, you'll see several different folders. Let's do a brief rundown. Config. This is where you'll find certain configuration files that pertain to settings in an individual project. We won't be editing any of these directly, but instead we'll be looking at how to update these settings directly in the editor in a later video. Now, content is where the bulk of your project lives. This, along with config and the project file itself, are the bare bones of any Unreal Engine project. We'll be looking at how we manage this folder using the editor's content browser in the next video. Derived data cache is exactly what it sounds like. If you're ever working on a professional Unreal Engine project and you hear someone mention the DDC, this is what they're referring to. No, the DDC isn't some government agency we need to worry about. This folder is a cache storage for dynamically generated data. The contents are constantly changing, and this is one of the folders that could actually be deleted without breaking your project because the data itself will be regenerated the next time you open Unreal. Our next folder in the list, Intermediate, is another one of those folders that can be safely deleted and automatically regenerated. Think of this folder as your project's temporary folder for local user data. Keep in mind that this folder does contain your locally compiled shaders, so while you might not include this folder in source control or when sharing the project folder, deleting it does mean that Unreal will have to compile shaders again the next time you open it. The next folder, Saved, is your local user-related content. This means any local user settings, as well as where things like your screenshots and rendered videos will be saved. We'll go into that more in depth later, but this is another folder that you generally would not include for things like sharing the project or uploading source control. All right, now you should be a little bit more familiar with Unreal Engine projects. Congrats on making it through one of the more boring topics, but understanding the structure of projects is essential knowledge if you're serious about working with Unreal Engine. To recap, we looked at how to launch Unreal Engine and create a new project using the third-person starter template in the Games tab. We looked at how to open an existing project and create a shortcut to our project file. And finally, we deconstructed the project folder to see what makes an Unreal Engine project tick. All right, so we've got a project to work with, and now it's time to get familiar with using the editor. Unreal Engine is a powerful piece of technology, and that can make it absolutely terrifying when you first load into it. I've had hundreds of my students over the years tell me that they wanted to learn Unreal Engine on their own, but as soon as they opened the editor, it was so overwhelming that they immediately just closed it and never came back. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to navigate the interface inside of Unreal Engine by showing you the 6 major elements you need to understand in order to get started. By the end of this video, you'll look back in awe at how easy it actually is to work with. All right off the bat, let's jump into the bread and butter of the editor, the viewport. This is the 3-dimensional stage where you'll be building out your world. All of your models, characters, and everything else will exist within this stage, which Unreal refers to as a level. And we'll dive deeper into what that means in a later video. Now, there are 3 different options for navigating the camera around the viewport. Option number 1, the WASD method. This is actually my personal favorite method. Now, if you're familiar with PC gaming, you'll feel right at home with this one. What we're going to do is hold down the right mouse button to activate this method, and while you're holding down that button, press W on your keyboard to move forward, press S on your keyboard to move backwards, press A to move left, and press D to move right. While holding down the right mouse button, you can also move your mouse to rotate the camera's look at direction around. Using a combination of rotating the camera and using WASD to move, you can get around anywhere. Option number 2, the Unreal method. This is the movement scheme that Epic developed in its earliest versions from back in the 90s. To use this, we can hold down the left click on the mouse and move your mouse up to move forward along a completely horizontal plane, or move your mouse down to move backwards along that same plane. Moving your mouse left and right will rotate the camera around. Holding down both the left and right mouse button at the same time, you can pan the camera around like this. And of course, just like with the WASD method, holding down just the right mouse button lets you rotate the camera's look at direction around. Keep in mind that using this method, the left click will always move along that horizontal axis, regardless of where your camera is actually looking at in the vertical axis. To move towards your look at direction, you'll need to use the WASD method. Option number 3, the Maya method. If you're used to working with 3D modeling software like Maya, this one is going to make a lot of sense to you. Holding down the Alt button on your keyboard, or Option on a Mac, you can use the left mouse button to orbit around the center of your viewport. You can use the right mouse button to dolly in and out. And you can use the middle mouse button to pan around. Now, one final thing that all of these different methods have in common is that you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. The scroll wheel can also be used to control the speed of your camera movement by using it while you're actively in the process of moving using the WASD method. Now, I personally use all 3 of these methods depending upon what I'm doing at any given time. I tend to favor the WASD method, but there are times when I want to orbit around a specific area, or I only want to move along a 2-dimensional plane. Next, let's have a look at the second major element, the outliner. Over here to the right of the viewport and on top is the outliner. This is a list of all the assets that are currently in your level. This includes models, lights, blueprints, and everything else that make up a level. All of these things Unreal refers to as actors. So every actor in a scene will show up here. If we click on one of these actors in the list, you'll see it highlighted in the viewport. With an actor selected, if you hit F on your keyboard, it'll actually move your camera to that actor. This is called focusing an actor. And if you were unaware, this actually works in nearly all 3D software. So if you're a modeler or sculptor and didn't know this, go give it a try. You'll also see that many of these actors in the default scene are organized into folders. You can move these into a different folder by dragging and dropping it. Alternatively, you can right-click and go down to Move To and select an existing folder to move it to. New folders can be created in the Move To dialog or by clicking this New Folder button up here. All right, next we're going to look at the Details panel. If we were to click on one of the items from within the viewport or in the outliner, You can see that the details panel gets populated with all kinds of parameters. What shows up here is largely dependent on the type of actor that you actually have selected. For example, with this cube selected, we can see options for things like the mesh, the materials, and the physics. However, if we come up here and click on this directional light, the details panel now gives us parameters to control things like the intensity, the color, and the source angle. We'll go deeper into what all of these parameters do on a specific actor type when we go over that actor type. For now, make note that all of the settings that you can change on an actor in a level will be found in this details panel. All right, the next interface element that we want to look at is the toolbar. Located directly above the viewport, the toolbar contains several items that help you craft your world. This includes things like the editing mode. Unreal actually has several different editing modes that change the way your interface looks and behaves depending upon what mode you're in. Selection mode is where you'll spend probably 80 to 90% of your time. But there are other modes that allow you to work with things like landscapes, vertex painting, and even 3D modeling within the engine. We'll go over each one of these modes in detail in the full course. Next to the editing mode, we have the create button. This allows you to add specific kinds of actors into your level. Your options are organized neatly into folders, but once you click on this button, you can also just start typing to search what you need. The toolbar contains buttons for working with level-related blueprints, as well as a button for quickly creating sequences, which are how you work with cinematics in Unreal. The toolbar is also where you'll find your play in editor controls, which we'll go into that in a later video. But for now, just know that you can click the play button to drop in and play, and then you can hit escape on your keyboard to exit. Platforms and settings we'll go over later. Just above the toolbar, you'll find the menu bar. File, edit, help. This is all pretty standard fare like any other software. One thing I do want to point you to is the window option. This menu contains all of the various panels that Unreal Engine has. There are a lot of things in here that we'll go over in dedicated videos in the full course, but the important thing to note is that if you ever lose a panel, this is where you go to get it back. Let's say you accidentally close your details panel. To get it back, you would go to Window, Details, Details 1. Clicking on this pops it back into place. Notice that there are 4 details panels in the list. This can be useful if you ever need to have a second floating details panel somewhere. Also note that you can dock any of these windows anywhere by clicking on the title tab and dropping it into a spot. As they say with any kind of creative endeavor, content is king, which is why our final and second most important interface element we're going to look at is the content browser. Now, if you remember deconstructing the project folder in the previous video, I mentioned that the content folder was where the bulk of the project actually lives. The content browser is how we actually access that content inside of the editor. To access the content browser, we can go down here to the lower left of the viewport and click on this content drawer button. This will expand our content browser as a temporary drawer element. Clicking outside of it will make it go away. You can also use the shortcut key of Control Space or Command Space on a Mac to pull it up. Now, I personally like to keep my content browser up at all times when I'm deep into crafting a scene, which you can do by going over here and clicking on this Dock in Layout button. To the left, you'll see a hierarchy of the folder structure. And to the right, you'll see the contents of the folder that you're currently in. Since we started with the third-person template and the starter content installed, you can see all the folders related to those in our content browser. Digging down into one of these folders, such as level prototyping, and then into meshes, you'll see some familiar-looking 3D models. These are representative of the models that the starter level in our viewport is made from. At this point, the Unreal Engine interface should be a lot less intimidating. There are a lot more aspects of the interface that we'll cover in the full course, but just knowing how to work with these 6 major elements puts you over 50% of the way there to mastery over the interface. All right, so you're comfortable with basic navigation around the editor. Now let's go ahead and take a look at working with content inside of the editor. As they say, content is king. And in the case of Unreal, without content, we just have an empty scene. So let's jump into my 7 keys for working with assets in our scene. The first key is to have a scene to actually work in. With the third-person starter template, you can see this playground in front of us when we first open the editor, but we'll actually want to create our own level to start working with. To do that, go up to File, New Level, and you'll get a dialog box with a few options in it ranging from open world to a blank empty level. We want to select Basic for this exercise. This is going to give us a bare bones level to work with that already has some lights and a sky in it, and with Basic selected, we'll just go ahead and click Create. Now, if you made any changes in the template level, then it's going to ask you if you want to save. Since we don't really want to mess with the starter template level, click on Don't Save. All right, with our new level open, the second key is going to be to add some content. So we're going to look at this in two different ways that we can do this. First, we're going to click on our Quick Add button in the toolbar. That's the little cube with a green plus symbol on it. This is going to give us a drop down with a lot of options, and you're going to get very familiar with many of these options later in the full course. For now, let's go down to Shapes, where we can click and drag a cube into our scene. Once you drop it in, you'll see this widget with some arrows. This lets you move the object around, but we'll actually dive into that a little deeper in the next step. First, I want to show you the second way of adding content to your scene, the content browser. Remember, we can click the little content drawer button in the lower left, or we can use the shortcut Control Space to bring up our content browser. I'm going to go ahead and click on Dock and Layout since I'm in the content adding mindset right now. From here, let's drill down into our starter content folder and then into the props folder. In here, you'll see all sorts of props that can be added to the scene. What we're looking for right now is pretty much anything with the word static mesh at the bottom of the thumbnail and at the top of the tooltip. This is a 3D object that we can use in the scene, just like the cube we added earlier. This leads us to our third key, which is transforming assets. Just like the cube, our chair has an arrow widget on it that will let us move it around. This is called the Move widget, and it's part of the Transform tools. If you work with any 3D modeling software, then you'll be familiar with the 4 tools in this set. Select, Move, Rotate, and Scale, with the corresponding shortcut keys of Q, W, E, and R. Now be sure to check out the cheat sheet below the video to help you remember those hotkeys. Now let's get back to the Move tool, which can be activated with W. The Move tool has 3 arrows, each representing a planar axis in 3-dimensional space. You can click and drag on any of these arrows to move an actor along its axis, or you can click on one of the little squares to move in 2 axes at once. Clicking in the very middle of the widget will let you move in all 3 axes at once, but I find that I spend most of my time using the square to move in a 2-dimensional planar axis when moving. Now, another cool thing that you can do is if you hold down Shift while you're moving an object, it'll actually move the camera along with it. The next transform tool that we're going to look at is the Rotate tool, which is activated with the E shortcut. Also notice that as I change tools, the highlighted tool in the viewport toolbar changes as well. These also act as buttons if you happen to forget the hotkeys, which you won't, right? The Rotate tool also has 3-axis control that you can rotate around. Hitting R will activate the Scale tool, which you can use to manipulate the size of an object. The Scale tool can be used in an individual axis, but this is one where you'll likely be using the center to scale the object uniformly most of the time. If you ever need to get granular when lining things up, you can access traditional orthographic viewports by going up to the button in the far right corner. Then you can maximize that with the same button. As an example, I'll go over here to the top viewport and maximize it. I'll then find my chair in the outliner, hit F to focus it, use the scroll wheel to zoom in closer, right-click and drag to move the viewport around, and then move my chair to line up with the cube. I can then click the button to go back to my 4-up view, then maximize my perspective viewport to continue working. Now, one more quick thing to understand about transforming assets is world space versus local space. World space, notated by the globe symbol up here, means that no matter what the rotation, the object will always be manipulated in relation to the world. Local space, on the other hand, which we can toggle to by clicking on this button, means the manipulation of the object will be relative to the object itself. Now, as you get more comfortable with moving objects around in the viewport, you'll find yourself toggling between world and local space a lot. Now, you've probably noticed that as I've been moving, rotating, and scaling things, that the adjustments are happening in a stair-step fashion. This is actually because of our fourth key, snapping. Snapping is the act of applying constraints to a transformation. For example, we can have something move 10 centimeters at a time, or we can have something move 100 centimeters at a time. And on that note, Unreal Engine uses the metric system, where one Unreal unit is equal to 1 centimeter. Looking up here in the viewport toolbar, we'll see the snapping options for move, rotate, and scale. For the icon on the left, you can click it to toggle it. Blue means that snapping is enabled, and gray means that it's disabled. The number on the right is the value of the snap. Clicking on this will change to a drop down so that you can change that value. Now, while you can toggle snapping off to get some good free-form control, remember that snapping is your friend when it comes to building a scene. Whether you're working on a digital set for a film or an environment for a game, snapping is one of your most valuable resources. In the industry, we call this working on the grid. Now, another cool trick with snapping is that you can hold down the V key on the keyboard to snap to a vertex on another object. This lets us do things like snap our chair to be centered on this cube. But what if my cube was rotated and I wanted my chair to be in the same orientation? That's where surface snapping comes in. By going up here to the surface snapping icon, I can turn on surface snapping. With rotate to surface normal turned on, if I hold down V, I can now snap not only to the cube's face location, but its rotation as well. Now that actually brings me to the fifth key of working with assets, grouping. Two or more objects can be simultaneously selected by holding down Control or Command and clicking on them. Then you can group them by hitting Control and G or Command and G on a Mac. Move them around as one, and then you can hit Shift and G to ungroup them if you need to. Now this actually ties into the number 6 key that I wanted to talk about, which is duplication. An object can be duplicated in the viewport by holding down Alt or Option on a Mac and then dragging it out. This is useful because it's much quicker than continuously dragging a new copy out from the content browser, and it's more accurately controlled than just doing a copy and paste. Both of which you can do if you wanted to, but getting comfortable with the Alt-Drag duplicate is going to be essential if you want to speed up your workflow. An example of using these two keys together would be adding a table with chairs around it, grouping that up, Alt-dragging out a copy, ungrouping it, tweaking the chairs a little bit, then grouping it back together again. Doing this, you could quickly build out an entire restaurant with subtle variations in chair placement. Now, our 7th and final key is to make use of the Details panel. Selecting one of our objects, if we look over at the Details panel on the right, take note of the Transform section. Here you'll see the location, rotation, and scale of the object represented in numerical values. This can be really useful for getting very granular with the transformation of an object, allowing you to get some very exact values. For scale, take note of the padlock icon, which allows you to toggle uniform scale on and off. With it off, you can scale a specific axis individually, and with it on, everything will scale uniformly, just like if you click the center of the scale widget. Mobility here for 3D models mostly relates to if the object is going to be moving or not. We'll cover that more in depth later in the full course. Below that, you'll see where you can actually change the static mesh. I could, for example, drag out a copy of this cube, then click on the chair, where I will then click on this little folder with a magnifying glass icon to locate the chair in the content browser. By the way, you can also do this with the shortcut of Control+B. And now, if I click back on the cube, I can click this arrow and a circle icon to assign that chair to this mesh actor. Notice that the mesh changes, but it's white now instead of chrome and yellow like the other one. This is because the actor itself is the same, as you can see by the same name of cube in the outliner, but we've changed the mesh that it's actually referring to, that it's actually referencing. The material is still the same basic shape material from before, just like with this other cube. Now we could actually click on the chair, use the Find in Browser button to locate the material, then go back to the cube that is now a chair and assign that material. And this is where the Details panel lets you update individual parts of an actor. You likely won't find yourself doing that exact step when you could just alt-drag a copy of the chair itself out, but where this does come in really handy is when you want to change the material on something. As an example, let's navigate to the Starter Content Architecture folder. We're going to drag this wall 400 by 400 out into the world, and we'll go up here to change our snapping to 500 centimeters. Then we'll drag out 2 copies. Now go into the Starter Content Materials folder, where you'll find all kinds of material options that you can play around with assigning to these 3 different walls. Another quick way to change the material on something is to just drag from the content browser and drop it right on top of the model. Alright, so now that you know how to work with content to lay out a scene, let's have a look at one of the most important aspects of 3D digital art: lighting. Lighting in Unreal is an art form in and of itself, and there are some powerful tools available to us. In the full course, we'll be going over an entire module's worth of content on lighting. There's just so much to cover when it comes to cinematic lighting. But in this video, I want to get you quick started with a high-level overview so that you can get in and start adding lights to your scene. So let's have a look at the 5 types of lights in Unreal Engine. The first light that we're going to look at is the directional light. Now, the directional light can most easily be thought of as the sunlight of a scene. If we create a new basic level, we're presented with a starter scene that already has a directional light in it. If we rotate our camera around, we should be able to actually find the sun in the sky. Over here in the outliner, under the lighting folder, we can find the directional light. Also note that the sky sphere is an actor that renders our blue sky. The volumetric clouds render the clouds, and this sky atmosphere is a special actor that ties it all together. We'll go over all of that in great detail later on in the full course. For now, let's just laser focus on this directional light. If we select the directional light and rotate it, we'll see the lighting in the level change in a time of day fashion. We can even see that the sun is now lower in the sky. If we take it a step further, we can actually capture a morning golden hour, and even a step further than that to capture a sunrise or a sunset. Any further and the map goes black as it translates over into nighttime, which has some special case considerations that we'll dive into later. Bringing the sun back up, let's take a look at the Details panel. Under the light category, let's have a look at this intensity parameter. You'll see a value of 6 lux. Now, lux is a measurement of illuminance per unit area. And if you're familiar with the lux measurement, then this can make Unreal's lighting a little confusing for you. In the real world, the sun has a lux value ranging from less than 40 all the way up to 120,000 in direct sunlight. And this depends on many factors such as time of day or the amount of clouds in the sky. Pair that with the fact that the sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth and the Earth's atmosphere diffuses some of that solar radiation. Unreal's internal gears are fudging some calculations and doing some magic behind the scenes. Keeping that in mind, you should pretty much ignore the lux aspect of the value here and just get comfortable with being creative with the art direction. The default value in a new basic map is 6. Many of us in the game and film industries have found 20 to be a solid average value for this. The important thing here, when you're getting started, is to just not overthink it too much. Now, next, let's have a look at the skylight. The skylight is a unique light that serves a very specific purpose. If you're familiar with HDRI lighting, or you're a 3D artist familiar with software that provides default lighting environments, such as Substance Painter or Marmoset Toolbag, this is what the skylight does in Unreal. It essentially acts as the HDRI lighting environment. By default, how this works is by capturing what it sees in the sky, including the sun, the clouds, and the color of the sky itself, to create a high dynamic range image to cast light out into the level. This is really great for outdoor environments. But you can also plug an actual HDRI image into the skylight to use that instead. To demonstrate that, let's create a new level, but this time we're going to select Empty Level. This is going to be a black viewport with nothing in it. So let's go ahead and drop a chair in from the starter content. Then let's go up to our Quick Add button, down to Lights, and then drop a skylight in. Notice how the chair is completely black. That's because there is no sky, sun, or clouds for the skylight to capture in order to create that HDRI environment. So instead of trying to capture what's not there, let's just define our own HDRI image. To do this, go over to the Details panel with the skylight selected, and we're going to change the source type from Captured Scene to Specified Cube Map. The starter content provides us with an example HDRI cube map to use, so we'll click on the dropdown and then we'll select it. Notice how suddenly our chair is lit. Double-click on the thumbnail to see the image that is actually being translated to these light values. The brighter parts of the image are brighter parts of the light, just like the darker parts of the image are darker parts of the light. And this equates to a giant light with varying values surrounding the level in a 360-degree sphere. Take note that we can adjust this source map cube angle to rotate the image around, which gives us some different lighting. The intensity scale will adjust how much of that light is actually being contributed. With a default value of 1, you're going to be working with some really small numbers here. And then light color will adjust the tint of the HDRI image that's produced. And of course, all lights have an Effects World checkbox that lets you toggle them on and off. All right, next, let's start diving into artificial lights. First on that list is going to be the point light. To start, I'm going to grab this floor from the Starter Content Architecture folder and then scale it up to get a bigger area to work with. Then I'll use the Quick Add to drag out a point light. Now, a point light is an omnidirectional light that radiates light outwards in a 360-degree sphere. Think of this like a light bulb, which should be easy to do based on the icon that it uses. Now, the size of the sphere of influence is controlled by the attenuation radius. This value tells the light how far it can travel, but not how far it will travel. That's actually controlled by the intensity of the light through a science called inverse squared dynamics. We'll cover that in depth in the lighting module of the full course, but for now, just think of the attenuation radius as an option that you can use to clamp how far the light can actually travel. With a larger attenuation radius, notice that as I change the intensity, it also affects the distance that the light travels. You'll also see that the value of intensity on the point light has a CD at the end. This stands for candelas and is the unit of measurement that Unreal uses for artificial lights. This is a more true-to-life measurement for you to use. Now, 8 candelas is equal to roughly 100 lumens if you're more familiar with that unit. Alternatively, you can type intensity into the Details panel search box and change the intensity units to lumen if you're more comfortable actually using them. Light color does exactly what you would expect it to and lets you change the color of the light. You can get as wild as you want here, but for more realistic lights, you can actually check the Use Color Temperature option and then use the color temperature values to get warmer or cooler lights. These are pretty accurate to real-world values. The next light that we're going to look at is the spotlight. Now, if you work in film or photography, this one is going to feel real familiar to you. We can grab this from the Quick Add menu as well. And just like the point light, intensity, color, and temperature all work the same. The attenuation radius also works the same, but because the light is not omnidirectional, it's actually represented by the length of the cone. Now, the width of the cone is controlled by this outer cone angle. The inner cone angle gives you an additional cone inside of the larger one that focuses the light a little harsher. Learning to use both cones together to get good results is an art form that we'll cover in full detail in the full course's cinematic lighting module. Next, let's look at our final artificial light type, the rect light. Short for rectangle, the rect light is a planar light source that simulates light coming from a rectangular surface, such as a television screen, a computer monitor, or even a rectangular light fixture. Also found in the Quick Add menu, the intensity, color, and attenuation radius are just like the other lights. The key settings for a rect light are the size and the barn door. For the size, you use the source width and source height to shape the rectangle. These units are in centimeters, of course. And then you can create a barn door effect with the barn door settings. Adjusting the angle, we can start to box the light in. Then we can use the length to make the doors longer. Now, while we can make what looks like a really good softbox shape, the barn door settings are actually more useful for creating some hard shadows, almost like a light coming through a barn door. Alright, now you're aware of what lights are available to use inside of Unreal Engine. Like I mentioned, cinematic lighting is an art form in and of itself, which is why we'll be spending a lot of time covering it in the full course, with an entire module of videos dedicated to just that subject by itself. Computers have been a big part of our lives for decades now. We all know how to use Control-S to save, or at least how to go to File, Save. But one of the questions I get all the time is, I saved my level, how come I lost half my work? Well, that's because Unreal isn't just one file. It's an entire ecosystem. But once you understand the 3 keys to success when you're saving your work, you'll never have that problem yourself. The first key is to understand levels versus actors. Let's break it down. A level is the scene that you actually see in your viewport. You'll also hear this referred to as a map or a set, depending upon your industry. You'll get used to hearing me call it a scene. These all refer to the same thing. The level itself is like a container for your layout. Everything inside of the level exists somewhere in the content browser or in the engine code for certain base elements like lights. When you hit Control-S, it's going to save the level and just the level. This saves the layout of any actors in it, but does not save the actor itself if you made any changes directly to an actor, such as changing the color of a material or the default material assigned to the mesh. Let's go ahead and create a new basic level, then hit Control-S to save it. You'll get the Save Level As dialog. Right-click on the content and select New Folder. Then just name it My Stuff with no spaces. Now we'll set a name for the map. I'll call mine Saving Tutorial, and then we'll click Save. I'll use the Quick Add button to add a couple of cubes, and then hit Control-S to save again. Now, each actor in a scene is self-contained. While you can move, scale, rotate, and update the details of an actor in a scene, the base actor itself in the content browser keeps its defaults and is saved in the content browser. Remember how we dragged a chair into our scene and then manipulated it? If we were to drag the chair in from the content browser again, we'll get the original chair. We can then manipulate it in a different way. If we save the level, then both versions of the chair will be saved in that layout, but the original chair in the content browser remains unchanged. This is because the actor assets are saved independently of the level that they're in. To demonstrate, let's navigate to the chair in the content browser. Hit Control-D to make a duplicate of the chair so that we're not messing with the original. And if you select the thumbnail, then hit F2, you can rename it. I'll call mine SM_tutorial chair. Now, if we double click it, it'll open up the static mesh editor. In this editor, you can see a viewport with a showcase of the asset in it on the left and a details panel on the right. Let's go ahead and change the material. We can click on this drop down and see a list of all of the materials in the project. You can also search for a material. I'll type in gold and assign this one. Notice how the thumbnail in the browser has an asterisk on it. This means that the asset has changes and it needs to be saved. To save our new chair, we'll have to click the Save button in the asset editor. Now, if we drag our new chair out into the scene, you'll see it has the new gold material on it. And the original chair still has the original material on it. Now, if we go into the Starter Content Materials folder, let's find another material. How about brushed nickel? We can drag and drop that onto the slot in the editor. Notice that it changes in the level. However, if we go up to this Browse button in the asset editor to find it in the content browser, you'll notice it still has the asterisk. This means that the asset itself is not saved even though you see it in the editor. So even if you saved the level, if you were to close Unreal now without saving the asset, then when you came back, the chair would be gold again. Remembering to save in different places can be kind of cumbersome, but Unreal does provide a solution to make it easier, which brings me to the second key, using Save All. If you go to File, you'll see several save options, including one called Save All. The hotkey for this is Control-Shift-S. Now, if you remember no other shortcut, remember this one. This will save you more than you know. Say it out loud with me. Control-Shift-S. Control-Shift-S, or Save All, does exactly what it says. It saves everything. It saves the level layout you're working in, all of the settings inside of it, and all of the actors that you've updated. When you're working on a project in Unreal Engine, you'll want to shift your mindset away from the traditional Control-S to save, and get comfortable with Control-Shift-S to save all. Now, real quick, while we're on the topic, I want to bring up something that's new in Unreal Engine 5. The concept of one file per actor. Now, you may hear this phrase thrown around a bit in various conversations, but what does it actually mean? Didn't we just talk about how all actors are their own independent files in the content browser? Yes, we did. But one file per actor is actually referring to something completely different. This really pertains to working on group projects, specifically related to source control, which is something that we'll talk about in full detail later in the full course. Traditionally, only one person on a team could work on a level at a time. They would have to check out and lock everyone else out of that level while they were working on it. Unreal Engine 5 changed that by introducing the one file per actor system. What this means is that each actor that exists in a level has all of its level-related information, such as location, scale, and rotation, saved in an external file. Now, these external files are more like hidden files with gibberish names that exist only to store that information outside of the level itself. You don't need to worry about tracking them or working with them directly. All that happens automatically behind the scenes. Just know that this allows more than one person to work on the same level at the same time, which is something that you couldn't do in Unreal Engine 4. All right, so we've talked about building scenes with content, and I've shown you what it looks like a couple of times to just drop in and play in the editor. But let's take a moment to get familiar with using this feature. Now, assuming you created your project with the third-person starter template, you should be all set up with a default game mode that will let you play. Here in the template level, when you first open Unreal, you can go up here and click on this green play button to drop in and play an editor. The hotkey for that is Alt-P, and then Escape to exit. Once you hit play, take note of this message that says, click for mouse control. This means that to start playing, you need to click once in the viewport to go into game mode. You can then hit Shift F1 to get your mouse cursor back. The messages in the upper left should remind you of this if you forget. Once you're playing, it's standard PC gaming controls. WASD to move, just like getting around the viewport in edit mode, and then spacebar to jump. Next, let's talk about eject and possess. When you're playing in editor, you could say run your character up here, hit Shift F1 to get your mouse cursor back, then go up here and click on this eject button. This will eject you from the player so you can move around the scene just like in edit mode. Except the game world is still playing. Click the gamepad icon that it changed to in order to possess the character again. This can be really useful if you need to do something like, say, test out moving an object in the scene. Just eject, move the object, and then possess again. Note that when you exit play mode, this change will not be saved, so you'll need to repeat the action for real outside of play mode. Notice that when we hit play, we always start from the same position. This is controlled by an actor called Player Start, which looks like a flag with a gamepad icon. Wherever you place this actor in your scene is where you will start whenever you hit play. You can, however, go up here to the 3 dots menu and change your player start at location to current camera location. This will make it so that when you hit play, you'll drop in wherever you happen to currently be in the viewport. Being able to drop in and play is useful, but sometimes you just need to see some action that only works when the game is in play mode, but you don't need to actually run around with your character. You can do this with the Simulate functionality. Going to the 3 dots again, you can see a list of options under Modes. Selected Viewport is what we have been using, and it's the one that you'll be using most of the time. Many of the others are special cases. The bottom option of Simulate, though, can be very useful. It'll let you activate the game world without actually playing in it. Let's unpack a use case. Bring up the content browser and go to Starter Content Particles folder. Find the P_explosion and drop it into your scene. Notice how when we dropped it in, it exploded once, but never again. This is because it is a one-time event, as you would expect an explosion to be, or at least you would hope it would be a one-time event, or maybe a no-time event. Now let's go up to the 3 dots and change our mode to Simulate. Notice how when you change it, it immediately drops you in. If you hit Escape, you'll see the play icon has changed to let you know that you are set to Simulate mode. Now you can hit play to simulate all you want. Very useful for tweaking positions of one-time events like explosions. Alright, so you've done some cool stuff in Unreal and want to show it off with some screenshots. There's actually a really quick way to get these screenshots as long as you know how to grab them and where to find them once you do. Let's jump right in. Here in the editor, grabbing a screenshot is quick and easy. First, hit F11 to maximize the viewport. This is a toggle, so you'll hit F11 to go back again. You can also use Shift and F11 to toggle full screen, hiding your taskbar. I recommend doing this because it'll give you the correct aspect ratio if you're on a standard 16:9 screen. Hit the G key to go into Game View, which hides all your widgets. With your full screen viewport, now just hit F9 to take a screenshot. You'll see a little pop-up message that you can click on to go directly to your screenshots folder. But if you miss it, don't worry. Just go to your project folder in Explorer or Finder, go into the saved folder, and then you'll see a screenshots folder. This is where all of your screenshots are saved. Now, what if you have a view that you want to continuously capture as you iterate? Well, the best way to do that is with cameras, which we'll go over in depth in the full course. But right now, I want to introduce you to a little trick to save viewport camera locations. These are called bookmarks. To create a bookmark, you find the view that you want, then you hit Control plus a number to save it. To demonstrate, I'm going to hit Control plus 1 to save a bookmark here in my scene. Then I'll go over here and hit Control plus 2 to save another bookmark. I can now use 1 and 2 on my keyboard to quickly jump to each one of these camera angles. Now, if you go up to this hamburger menu in the upper left of the viewport, you'll see an item called Bookmarks. This is where you can go to see and manage what bookmarks you currently have saved, as well as you could set bookmarks here too. I highly recommend using the hotkeys though. All right, now you know how to grab screenshots so you could be able to show off your work. Later in the full course, we'll go over cinematic camera settings so you can get the real good shots. For now, take everything you've learned so far, play around to get comfortable working in Unreal, and take some screenshots to share what you're working on. In the next module, we'll start diving into working with assets so we can start creating even cooler scenes for you to take screenshots of. I'll see you there.